Yo, yo, welcome in Magic players. Travis here with Judge Kyle,
How's it going?
and we're going to be talking about Shadows over Innistrad, some of the new rules, things to avoid or things to do, basically how the things work. I know some of you have pre-releases coming up or release or are playing standard and want to know exactly how everything works. So we're going to try. Judge Kyle is going to help us figure out what's going on. So, what do you think about the new set as far as rules? Is it a particularly complex one? Is it simple?
No, I think since we've got a lot of returning mechanics, that it's going to be smoother than when we have something like Cons Block, where there's just insane number of new mechanics. Um, there is some changes to the existing rules for double face cards and for Madness. Those will be slight hiccups, but mostly it's making things cleaner, especially with some of the kind of designs they made with this set. So I think it'll be great.
So, where do you want to start? We've got Double Face, we've got Madness, we've got Delirium, and we've got Skulk. Those are the four main
Well,
mechanics. It seems like.
let's start with double face cards, and I specifically
Hmm.
want to address the rules changes that happened with double
Hmm.
face cards, because those that kind of played when we had double face cards in original Innistrad block, um, I want to make sure that everybody understands the change that's happened. So,
Hmm.
the first one is the casting cost. So previously, if you had a double face card which transforms to a back face, the back face converted mana cost was 0, and that's been changed now so that the back side's converted mana cost is the same converted mana cost as that of the front face. So that's relevant in different cases, but that's
Hmm.
also going to apply to not just the Innistrad block double face cards, but also the Origins
Hmm.
Planeswalkers too. So
So,
that's
when is this the most relevant? Like engineered explosives or Silk Wrap, right? Is that?
yeah, these
Yeah.
are all good
Uh-huh.
examples of that, right? So before those would have a mana cost of 0, and now they don't. Um, Now the other thing to remember is that this doesn't affect morph cards, which are face down cards,
Mhm.
and
So there's
those
still
will
zero.
still have a converted mana cost of 0.
Cool. So
So
yeah, so
uh,
double face, how does that work as far as the flipping, the triggers? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Well, it depends on the card because each card has its own different triggers in terms of what would cause the card to go from face up to, front facing to backside facing. And I think one of the cycles that we've seen prevalent in the Innistrad block as well as here is the werewolves. And so the werewolves have the trigger that says at the beginning of each upkeep, so not just your own, but each
Hmm.
upkeep. If it's face up, then I believe it's if on the previous turn no spells were cast, then transform this creature. In which
Hmm.
case it would go from front facing to back facing.
Hmm.
Um, and the back face says at the beginning of each upkeep, if a player casts 2 or more spells, then transform this creature. Now, the thing to remember is that that's actually a trigger that uses the stack. Your opponent would have a chance to respond. So, and when a creature changes from front facing to back facing, all characteristics continue with that creature. So, any
What do you
auras that
mean?
are on that
Okay.
creature,
Oh yeah, the
so
aura stay
auras
on.
that are on it, any +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters,
Uh-huh.
they stay on it,
Uh-huh.
as well as any damage that's on it. So
Hmm.
if, let's say, you've got a creature that's a 4/4 and you shock it, so you've put 2 damage on it, and then
Hmm.
it transforms into a 2/2, that creature is going to die because it has 2 damage on it.
So you would shock it during the upkeep or something like that, or
Yeah,
if it flipped for
and
otherwise, because
this
some
was
of them
really
flip at
relevant.
different times.
Yeah, this was really relevant in original Innistrad block with
Hmm.
if you had a mirror match with red green and you had well, I'm trying to blank on the name of the card right now. But when it would flip, it would do 2 damage
Huntmaster.
and Huntmaster of the Fells. So there you were in
Yes.
the situation where you were stacking Huntmaster triggers, and it had to do basically depending on whose turn it was. When those Huntmasters flipped, it would not necessarily go in the player's favor that they thought it would. So
So now it's getting complicated.
that. But again, we don't. I don't think we have any Huntmaster triggers to deal with in this
No,
case.
we
So
have
far,
Arlen
I've seen
Cord.
That's true, and so there is another change. This is relevant with
Mm-hmm.
Avacyn.
Mm-hmm.
So Avacyn has the ability to create multiple transform triggers, and the
Mm-hmm.
rules have been changed with stacked transform triggers,
Mm-hmm.
where they wouldn't make Avacyn transform multiple times. The way that the
Mm-hmm.
transform rule now states is that if there are multiple transform triggers, only one will resolve.
That's really weird how that works. It's a
Right.
patch. Huh. Okay, here's another thing. So Arlen flips. You've already used the Planeswalker once. Can you use it again?
So you can't use it again. So the
Mm-hmm.
planeswalker is still the
Mm-hmm.
same planeswalker, which you can only use once each turn at sorcery speed.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have the ability to use that planeswalker a second time. But again,
Mm-hmm.
remember, because she's transforming, the loyalty counters that you have will remain on that creature or on that planeswalker.
Sweet. Okay, that helps clarify. So, anything else on transform, double face, or should we? Oh yeah,
The
one other thing. Checklist is important, right? So, how do you,
Yes.
if,
So
like,
this
can you
is
see the
this
sleeve in your, your Delver or whatever it is, and maybe you can
this
see it
is
through the back?
this is really important with competitive REL in terms of marked cards. So they have checklist cards that you can use as opposed to actually just using the double face card in your sleeve. And if you were to play without sleeves, then you're not going to be able to use a double face card without using the checklists. So the checklist cards are there also in the case of opaque sleeves. So the problem is if you have sleeves that are see-through, where you can recognize any part of the card through the sleeve, then you can't be using double face cards in those sleeves. You need to be using a checklist card because if you don't, it's marked cards. It's a game loss. So
Don't get a
that's
game loss.
yeah, don't get a game loss. So either use sleeves that you can't see through or use checklist cards.
Can you can you use a makeshift checklist card? Is that
Cannot
legal?
use
I
a
actually
make
don't
list
know.
card. It has to be an
That's
official
too bad.
checklist card. And you have to make sure that you're actually marking the checklist card for the card that it is, the double face card that it's representing. Additionally, you can't be mix and matching between checklist cards and double face cards. You need to be doing one or the other. And the reason for this is to make sure that we don't get unintentional game losses where, like, let's say you have your double face card and you forget that, or like you put it to the graveyard with your checklist card, and then you go to shuffle up, and now you got 61 cards in your deck.
And
Um,
one of them is face up as well, right? It's like,
and one of them is your double face card.
hmm
So the thing to remember there too is that if you are going to be using checklist cards and you have your double face cards in your sideboard, they need to be in different sleeves. So you need to have a different type of sleeve than your deck sleeve if you're going to be using the checklist cards and your double face cards
yes,
in your sideboard.
use your use black for your main deck and pink
Use
or whatever, something
use
high
clear.
contrast, right?
Use clear
Use
sleeves for
clear,
your double
yeah,
face,
yeah.
so that way you could
Oh,
flip it
that makes
over
way,
and yeah,
yeah, that makes way more sense. And you can use it to separate your sideboard and your main deck. Although,
that's a
is
good
that a
idea.
problem that your opponent sees your sideboard and they're like, okay, so we know that I know you're playing Arlen Cord because, or you're playing flip cards definitely, right? Because they can see.
Oh,
Is
well, I
that
mean,
an issue?
if you're ever asked to present your sideboard, which you're legally required to do if your opponent asks for you to see that you have 15 cards in your sideboard, you don't need to be pulling your double face cards out of your deck box. Just pull your 15 cards from your sideboard out and show that you have those 15.
Sweet. Okay, that makes sense. Anything else on double face, or can we move on to madness?
There's a couple other things that are really minor. The other rule change is about copying. They just copying is always clone effects are always kind of a little messy, and so they kind of cleaned that up a little bit. The concern is, let's say you were to clone the back face of a double face card, and
Yeah. What's the
then
cost
that
on it?
so in the case of you copying the backside of the double face card, the converted mana cost will be 0 for that clone,
Weird.
which is a little weird, but it's because it doesn't have that forward face. So additionally, if
Mhm.
that
It's the.
clone,
Oh, I see.
if that clone uh, has the transform trigger, it
What
can't
happens? Yeah.
transform. It can't
Oh, weird.
transform to the front face because the front face is not has not been
Do you flip it?
cloned by. there's
into
nothing to
just a
flip.
blank magic card.
It just remains in play in the zone that it's currently in. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
concern about this is if you were to copy the if you were to copy a Jace,
Mm-hmm.
this is where it gets a little tricky because you're copying the Jace. You
Mm-hmm.
haven't the Jace copy doesn't have a backside. So when
Mm-hmm.
you go to well, I guess it's not transform with Jace, but when you go to turn Jace into a planeswalker, that case it says exile. The clone will get exiled, but it won't
Wow,
return.
your Jace gets exiled. That is something you should know because that would be a horrible blowout.
Yeah, so
Yeah, that'd be
there's a
very
change
sad.
to double face cards that you got to consider. But in terms of pre-release, you don't have to worry so much about that. The other thing to think about though is not all the double face cards are creatures into creatures. We have some interesting double face cards. We have a land that turns into a creature.
Yeah, so
We
what
have
happens
a
in that case if you have a land enchantment? Westvale Abbey has say some kind of land enchantment on it, or a fertile ground, and it flips into a creature. Does that fall off then?
yeah, it's no longer able to enchant. It's no longer a valid target for the enchantment, so it would fall off. The ones that I was thinking about is there's a blink effect which would blink a creature, and then if it's a spirit, then it gets a +1/+1 counter when it comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to blink a creature, so that we have for example, there's an aura that turns into a creature, and if you were to blink that creature, it would come back as a forward face. It wouldn't be coming back as the back
Mm-hmm.
face. So it would be
So it
coming
always
back
comes
as an
back as
aura.
the front face.
It always comes back as the front face from exile.
Interesting. Okay. Madness, or is there more?
We can move to Madness. That's fine.
Okay.
Madness has a
So
change too.
yeah,
We should
well, so
address
let's
the
hear
change
that.
in Madness. The change to
Mm-hmm.
Madness is now, rather than the card going to the graveyard and then casting it, in a sense, from the graveyard, now what Madness does is when it goes to the graveyard, it actually goes to exile and you're casting it from exile. So because of that means things that count the number of cards in the graveyard, like
Like
Jace,
Jace. Yep.
you're going to have to make sure you have 5 additional cards in your graveyard. The card that you're casting for Madness is not going to count as part of that.
So how is that? Are there any cards that are like when you cast something from exile? Is that are affected by this? I'm not sure in the history of the Magic if there's ever been that trigger.
I don't think it's that so much. I'm trying to think. I think there is another strange kind of corner case where if let's see, besides counting the cards in your graveyard, so let's say you have an ability that says I think there's a card that when you both players discard a card, and then this card, when it goes to the graveyard, it checks to see is it the types? We should find this card. Let's take a look and see the
What's the
card that I'm
name of it?
talking about. It's a black card,
From
and
Shadows of Innistrad.
Shadows from Innistrad, and it's a Madness card. And
You're talking about the Drain 3 card, or am I thinking of something else?
it drains, or the player loses life based on the shared types. Okay. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card. So this is Creeping Dread.
Mm-hmm.
Creeping Dread says it's an enchantment. At the beginning of each upkeep, each player discards a card. Each opponent who discarded a card that shares a card type with the card you discarded loses 3 life. So the interaction here with Madness is that, so you go to the beginning of your upkeep, you discard a card with Madness, you cast it for Madness, it gets exiled, and then you cast it from exile for the Madness, and then this trigger resolves, and since you still discarded a card, right? You still discarded this card. Mm-hmm. It would still count in terms of Creeping Dread.
Interesting. Is it just me, or have things gotten more complicated?
I mean, these types of
I
interactions
guess
are these are the kinds of things where when you run into a situation like this, think it out a little bit, communicate with your opponent, but
judge.
definitely call a judge. Yeah,
Yeah,
and the judge will really help out. And even if you guys mess things up, and here it is, it's the end of the turn, and you realize that you really messed things up, call the judge over, and he or she will figure out how to make things better for you.
they won't. They're unlikely to give you a game loss. Don't worry about it.
Right,
Ask the
right.
question.
The
Yeah.
whole point of pre-release is so we all can get familiar with the cards and have some good times.
Yes. Yeah, I'm excited to do that myself. So this is helpful. I'm gonna have a little bit of an edge because I'm not gonna have to think about it so much. So, any other corner cases on Madness we should be aware of? Or um, Madness seems fairly simple. You discard, you exile it,
Right,
you
and
cast
then
it.
you cast it for the madness cost.
Okay. So let's talk about Delirium. This is a new thing. It's like kind of Tarmogoyfy. Tarmogoyf is the most commonly played card previously that's counted the number of types. So now it's like if your Tarmogoyf would have 4 power, you have Delirium, right? Delirium when you have 4 different types in your graveyard. So I mean, I haven't played a whole lot with Tarmogoyf myself. Like, what is the convention for keeping track of the different types, or is Delirium in both players' graveyard? Is it just in your
So
graveyard? How is this?
delirium, the difference between delirium and something like Tarmogoyf is Tarmogoyf considers all graveyards, and delirium only considers your own graveyard. So
Hmm.
um, in the case of Tarmogoyf, you would ask your opponent how many different types they would have in their graveyard. You would add any additional types that you would have in your own graveyard, and that would kind of give you your indication of
Hmm.
what the power and toughness was for Tarmogoyf. But the things to consider are sometimes players get confused on what actual types are. So the types that we consider in Magic are artifact, creature, enchantment, instant, land, planeswalker, sorcery, and then the one that everybody forgets because it's not really used anymore, tribal.
So yeah, there's 8 different ones. So
Right.
I mean, what you're still in standard and limited, we can rearrange our graveyard. Would it make sense to like put 4 different types at the top of your graveyard, or like how are you keeping track of this? You write 3 or you write 4? I mean, it seems you're supposed to say, "Hey, I have delirium right now." When you get delirium, or
I think
can you?
any time in which delirium would be relevant. So if you're casting a spell that has delirium as part of it, then
Hmm.
just say delirium and kind of maybe point out the 4 different cards that you have that represent the 4 different types
Hmm.
that you need for delirium to be active.
Hmm. So also worth noting, I'm not sure if there's any delirium that give extra toughness. Are there?
Any delirium
So
that give extra toughness?
I mean, if you take delirium away, like we talked about previously, the damage stays on, right? So you
Yeah.
might lose delirium and your creature gets smaller or something like that.
Right. So the thing to remember is that a lot of times these things like damage remain on the creature, and the creature's power and toughness might change. And if, like you're suggesting, the toughness was to be lowered as a result of either having or losing delirium, that creature might die.
This is something you learn about really fast on Magic Online. You're like, where did my creature go?
Right.
Right? It used to be you would move your equipment off your creature and then suddenly it disappears. You're like, where did it go? Right.
Right.
So
And I think
that should.
timing can be a considerable thing with delirium because, for example, when you're resolving a spell, that spell is not in your graveyard yet. So they don't get counted until it's actually resolved and then it's going to your graveyard. And so that upgrade or whatever it may be with delirium isn't going to go into effect until the spell actually goes to the graveyard.
Cool. Okay. So I totally forgot about this. Investigate is a new thing. So when you investigate, you or the other player, you got a colorless clue artifact token that I guess has
So
converted mana cost 0. You can pay 2, sacrifice it, draw a card. What's going on
that's
with
right.
these?
So the token it creates a token. The token has a name. It's Clue, and it has the artifact subtype clue. So those are
Mm-hmm.
kind of relevant. Um, it's not a creature type in any way. They're the tokens are normal artifacts, so they can be sacrificed and they can be targeted, um, and you can sacrifice it for another card's cost. So something, once you
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice an artifact for something,
Mm-hmm.
you can do that, or you can sacrifice the clue for its own ability to draw a card.
And it does go to the
Um,
graveyard briefly, right? Even though it's a token.
so the way that it works with tokens going to the graveyard
I
is
mean, if you
it
have
never.
Disciple of the Vault, does it?
I don't remember what is Disciple of the Vault. I
Whenever
need
a
more
graveyard
context.
goes, when a graveyard goes to when an artifact goes to the graveyard, the opponent loses a life. Is a clue going to the
Hmm.
graveyard when you sack it?
That is a good question. I don't believe that it actually hits the yard. I believe it. I mean, this is where maybe my understanding is maybe I'm a little iffy on this understanding, but I'm pretty sure that it just goes to exile. It actually doesn't hit the graveyard. It's
Well, token
destroyed. So
tokens go to
so
the graveyard, right?
and then they instantly go to exile.
Yeah, right. I guess we
I
don't.
mean,
We're not 100% on
yeah, I'm
this.
I'm not 100% sure on that. But my understanding is that they go to exile. And
My
I
bet
have
is
to
it
look
goes
at
to the
this.
graveyard, but I don't
Okay,
know.
so I'm curious if Disciple of the Vault says anytime a artifact is destroyed, or does it say anytime it goes to the graveyard from anywhere?
It's looking at graveyard from play, so I think that the clue is like a token, and it
It
goes
would
for
go to the
just for a
graveyard.
second,
So
and then
yeah,
it's
it would go to the
exile.
graveyard, and then because it's changing zones, it goes to exile.
Sweet. And how? I mean, what are you supposed to put a token in play for this? Or I know they have the clue tokens.
Yeah, they do have
Put
clue
those out.
tokens, and so yeah, and so I think it's at pre-release. Share your tokens, share the tokens that you have with other people, so that everybody can have good representations of what their board states. Same thing with like checklist cards. I think early on, especially at pre-release, they could be a little bit limited. I'm not sure because we haven't opened any product yet to know what the likelihood of getting a checklist card or getting a clue in your token slot of your packs are.
Hopefully, they're
But
not valuable like Chase Mythic Rares. Like,
right, and I'd say
yeah.
just in terms of pre-release, bring yourself some non some sleeves that aren't see-through, and go ahead and play with your double face cards because you're probably going to have checklist cards at a premium.
Cool. Okay, I think the main last thing is this new combat ability, Skulk. So Skulk seems pretty simple, but it confused me because I saw some cards with Skulk and it doesn't have any explanation of what it is, and I'm like, is this been around forever? Like, am I supposed to know what this is?
So
Oh, it's actually new, right?
yeah, it is a new ability. What you're noticing is there's a convention in Magic that we put the reminder text
Reminder.
on. We
Yeah.
put reminder text on cards at common and uncommon, and sometimes it gets removed. The reminder text gets removed from cards at rare and mythic rare. Um, so the understanding there is that you're probably going to run across some commons and uncommons that have skulk in your pool, so you'll have access to the reminder text and understand. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, what Skulk is that a creature with Skulk can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. Um, and the thing to consider here that's kind of interesting is that if, for example, you reduce the power of a creature to negative, that's not zero. It actually is a negative number. And so
So
you
a
still
-3 cannot block a -4.
that's correct. That is correct because -3 is greater than -4. So you got to do a little bit of math here. The thing is, after the blockers have been declared, then a creature with Skulk can increase its power, and that's going to be okay. So you could have your 0 power Skulk creature that can't be blocked by any creature with power greater than 0. And then let's say you have some fire breathing on it. You can then, after blockers have been declared, increase the power and uh, and get in for some damage.
Sweet. So skulking underneath something. I guess it's fair. I like that the name is kind of descriptive for this one. It's like if
Yeah,
something has skulk, you can kind of tell it's a combat ability. It's evasive,
right,
and you're skulking.
right,
Whereas, like, what the hell does madness mean, right? Like,
right, or delirium, right, or banding, right.
exactly. So that's one where not having reminder text is not quite as bad.
I would love to see the reminder
So
text for banding.
I still don't know what that does. I was playing back then too. I just know that you staple your cards together and then they form a team or
And
something
then,
like.
then you get to make decisions about blocking that you would normally get to make.
Yeah, I'm glad they don't do that anymore. Okay, so that seems like we've covered the main things.
Yeah.
Delirium, Double Face, Skulk, Investigate, Madness. So yeah, pre-release. You playing in the pre-release? You doing Friday night?
Yeah, I'm gonna travel out of town, and I'm gonna play in one, and then go travel a little bit further and judge in another one, and yeah, but it's gonna be a fun weekend.
Cool, man. Yeah, I'm going to Card Kingdom in Seattle with my brother on Sunday, and it's gonna be fun.
Cool.
Try
Yeah,
to mash on some noobs.
yeah. Let's see if you can pull off the draw like you did in with deflecting. What was it called? Deflecting palm.
Oh yeah, and the last a couple pre-releases
Yeah,
ago,
yeah.
there was a draw. We had a draw. I don't remember exactly how that happened. Yeah,
There
we
was he
both
was
died simultaneously.
somebody was attacking for lethal, and then deflecting palm made it so that both players died. So you had
Yeah,
to go to a
there's
game.
weird
You had to
things
go to a
that can
game
happen.
four.
Game
Yeah,
four can happen.
yeah.
Sweet, Kyle. Well, thanks for coming on. And those of you, if you want more rules, primers, stuff like that, we can make this happen consistently. And we're more likely to if you say, "Hey, this is useful stuff." So make sure to comment. And then if y'all want to follow Kyle, where should they follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter at brother52. And then I also just want to give a shout out to JudgeCast, and also every single set Wizards puts out a release notes, which is really, really great reading
Yes,
going in. So,
we're going off the FAQ actually, and
okay.
we'll put a link to that in the description so you can give that a skim. And it's if you too TLDL too long didn't listen, just scroll through the FAQ. So yeah, so sweet. Thanks, Kyle, and let us know what you think in the comments.
Later on.
Take care.